The number 87 and a New England Patriots jersey will now always be associated with Rob Gronkowski. But Gronk wasn't even the first All-Pro tight end to wear number 87 for the Pats. When you're imagining a red zone threat, chances are they'll look a lot like Ben Coates. At 6'5" and 250 pounds, the tight end with soft hands and a nose for the end zone was a hard target to miss.
Hey man, Ben Coates is the biggest tight end I've ever seen in my life. Really? That brother's big.
Not only did Coates have the strength and size to bring down a lot of passes in traffic, but he was surprisingly nimble and fast for as big as he was. Ben Coates could run past you or take you for a ride and put up some incredible receiving numbers at a time when numbers like that weren't common for a tight end, becoming the favorite target of Drew Bledsoe throughout the 90s and playing a big part in turning the Patriots into a contender. Unfortunately, the dominance of Gronk has overshadowed the memory of Coates, but credit to Gronk because he was filling some big shoes. Let's jog your memory. Growing up in South Carolina, Ben Coates was a late bloomer on the football field, only joining Greenwood High School's football team as a senior. Yet it became apparent quickly that Coates had potential as a pass catcher, even being named All-Region. But his late start to football led to him getting little recruitment attention coming out of high school, so he would decide to pursue an athletic career at Livingstone College, an HBCU which competed in Division II, as a member of the CIAA. And when Coates arrived on campus about 25 pounds heavier than he had been in high school, the receiver made the switch to tight end. And that was a good decision, seeing as how Coates was a team MVP as a freshman. Then after a great sophomore year, he redshirted in 1989 to focus on academics and to play basketball, returning to the team in 1990 and earning a first-team All-CIAA selection, as he was also named a Black College Sports All-American. But playing at such a little-known program would prevent Coates from getting much exposure to NFL scouts. Yet he would still decide to try his luck, leaving Livingstone after his junior season with career totals of 103 receptions for 1,268 yards and 18 touchdowns. And while Coates wasn't really on anyone's NFL draft radar, he definitely had the size of an NFL player. And sure, no one really knew about the 6'5", 250-pound tight end before the combine, but that all changed afterwards, as a great combine led to his stock rising, and it continued to rise all the way up to the 1991 NFL Draft. And with this year's tight end class being weak, Coates was feeling good about his chances. Ben Coates was selected in the 5th round by the New England Patriots, one of the worst teams in the league, as they were on their 3rd coach in 3 years and were coming off a 1-15 season. So Coates would be coached by Dick McPherson as a rookie. And while the offense was one of the worst in the league, they actually had a solid group of receivers, which didn't really bode well for Coates, as the Pats' only offensive Pro Bowler this season was their tight end, Marv Cook. But Coates would still get praise from his head coach and would just take whatever he could get this season, finding his way onto the field due to his work as a blocker. And while he didn't get a lot of balls thrown his way, he would get his first career touchdown late in the season versus Indy to force overtime in a game that New England eventually won, which was one of their 6 wins on the year. Improvement? Yes, but still not enough for the playoffs, as Coates' rookie year had ended with him catching 10 passes for 95 yards and that 1 touchdown. New England's passing offense looked quite similar in 92, but quarterback instability saw them regress. Starter Hugh Millen got the team off to an 0-5 start, before a shoulder injury limited him to just 2 more games. And with New England trying out multiple starting QBs after this, the necessary chemistry just didn't develop, with most of the Pats receivers seeing their numbers drop from last year. Except for Coates, who Marv Cook already knew he had to worry about prior to the season, as 92 would see Coates essentially double all of his numbers from last year, even finding the end zone 3 times throughout the season. But New England didn't win their first game until week 11, and after winning their second the following week, they didn't win again, finishing at 2-14, as Coates finished year 2 with 20 receptions for 171 yards and 3 touchdowns. But everything would change going into 93, and a new era of Patriots football began. After the 92 season, the Pats made a big coaching change, bringing in 2-time Super Bowl winner Bill Parcells. And under Parcells, the Pats would see their biggest improvement come on the defensive side of the ball in 93. But New England had also gotten the first overall pick in the draft, and with that pick, they selected a true franchise quarterback in Drew Bledsoe. Fryer was gone, but the Pats had some solid new receivers in veteran Michael Timpson and rookie Vincent Brisby, and would get a 1,000-yard season on the ground from running back Leonard Russell. But something every young quarterback needs is a security blanket, and that's what a third-year Ben Coates would become for Bledsoe. Coates began the season with a touchdown, but was in and out as a starter over the first half of the year. Yet still, over the Pats' first 8 games, Coates would have both a 2-touchdown performance and his first 100-yard game, as overall he would lead the team in every major receiving category this season. So with Coates quickly becoming Bledsoe's favorite target, while simultaneously earning the praise of his new coach, Coates became the permanent starter in Week 12. Yet this was in the midst of what would become a 7-game losing streak, with the Pats winning just 1 of their first 12 games. But their defense came on strong near the end of the season, and they won their final 4, to finish at an improved but not playoff-worthy 5-11, as Coates' season ended with him catching 53 balls for 659 yards and 8 touchdowns. So the foundation was set in 93, and in 94, Coates and Bledsoe led the offensive charge. Contract disagreements led to New England moving on from Russell, and in turn New England would roll out one of the worst rushing attacks in the league this year, but their passing attack more than made up for that. Bledsoe would have a career season in year 2, and was really spreading the ball around, with New England becoming the first team in NFL history to have 5 players record at least 50 receptions. But the man who again led the team was their giant tight end. The Pats had re-signed Coates long-term, and moved on from Marv Cook during the offseason, making way for Coates to be a starter from Week 1, and immediately, they knew it was the right decision, with Coates going for a career-high 161 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns in the season opener. Then the following week, he went for 124 yards and 2 more touchdowns. But the Pats' defense had a slow start, and they lost both, yet they would get back on track with 3 straight wins. Then came a 4-game losing streak, after the offense had gone cold, and a now 3-6 Pats team were heading for another disappointing season. But cue Ben Coates. Even with teams sending double and triple coverage at him, his first career 10-reception game in Week 11 would get New England a win over Minnesota. Then 2 weeks later, he hauled in a career high and Pats franchise record 12 receptions in a defeat of Indy. And with touchdowns in back-to-back games late in the year, the first team All-Pro Coates had been a huge reason why the Pats ran the table after their poor start, as not only had he recorded career highs in receptions and receiving yards, but his 96 catches would set the single-season record for tight ends, and also be a top 5 mark in the league this year. And the praise from Parcells was only growing, as he felt that Coates had all-time great potential. But right now, Coates and his 10-6 Patriots were just worried about the playoffs. The Pats were in the wild card and taking on the Cleveland Browns. Yet while Coates finished with 6 catches for 79 yards, half of those catches came when the game was out of reach, as turnovers were the difference in the Pats' loss to the Browns, with Coates' career year seeing him catch 96 passes for 1,174 yards and 7 touchdowns. There was buzz in New England going into 95, and Coates was a star, a player who continued to see his name be added among NFL tight end royalty. And his QB couldn't have been more confident in him, saying that he would throw to Coates every play if he could. And with the passing attack they had last year, that wasn't a bad idea, but they were missing an effective rusher. So that need was more than addressed with the selection of running back Curtis Martin in the NFL draft, who would go on to rush for nearly 1,500 yards as a rookie. But the Pats were still throwing that ball, as Bledsoe led the league in pass attempts. But this season was a far cry from last year through the air. Bledsoe had a significantly worse year in 95, and his receivers were understandably affected by this. Coates remained the team's top pass catcher and was still over 900 yards on the season, even though defenses were doing everything to slow him down. But overall, his numbers were down across the board. A season-opening win versus Cleveland would see Coates go for over 100 yards. But after this, the Pats lost 5 straight, and the Cleveland game would end up being the only time that Coates surpassed 100 yards this year. Yet he was still Bledsoe's #1 target, which was made very clear in a Week 13 win over Buffalo, when Coates hauled in a career-high 3 touchdowns, and would have another 2-touchdown game in a loss to Pittsburgh near the end of the season. So Coates still had produced in a way that got him his 2nd straight Pro Bowl and first-team All-Pro selection. But with Bledsoe's down year, and a Pats defense who had dropped one of the worst in the league, the team hadn't produced enough to make a return to the playoffs, finishing at just 6-10, as Coates' year ended with him hauling in 84 passes for 915 yards and 6 touchdowns. But with a couple more additions to the offense, New England was hard to stop in 1996. Bledsoe had 2 new receivers, with the Pats drafting Terry Glenn and also signing Shawn Jefferson in free agency. And with these 2 guys on the outside and a capable receiver out of the backfield in Martin, the Pats had talent, but also a lot of mouths to feed. And with Martin also commanding a lot of touches in the run game, Coates would see his receiving numbers drop significantly, but he was still their most reliable pass catcher, especially when the Pats were in scoring position, as out of Bledsoe's 27 touchdowns, 9 of them went to Coates, as Coates would lead the team in that category yet again, while also setting a career high and earning another Pro Bowl selection. So Coates was Bledsoe's go-to guy, especially early in the season, as New England again started the year poorly, but a 3-game win streak from weeks 3 through 6 would see Coates find the end zone in each game. Then as the season went on, and Bledsoe developed more rapport with his other receivers, Coates saw his numbers dip, as he took a backseat to the more dynamic playmakers. But when you needed him, he'd be there. With the Pats needing to win their season finale versus the Giants to clinch the AFC East, they fell behind 22-0 in the first half. But a huge second half comeback would be completed when Coates got the game-winning score, and the Pats secured home field advantage for a divisional round matchup with Pittsburgh. Coates would be quiet in this one, as weather conditions called for running the ball, and Curtis Martin ran all over the Steelers, en route to an easy New England win, as the Patriots were headed to an AFC Championship matchup with the upstart Jacksonville Jaguars. Neither team was really able to get anything going offensively, so Coates was again quiet. But a fourth-quarter scoop and score for New England would ice the game and send the Pats to their second Super Bowl in franchise history. Coates would save his best for last in the Super Bowl, finding the end zone late in the first quarter to give the Pats a 4-point lead going into the second, and overall finishing with 6 catches for 79 yards. But the Packers' special teams was the difference, helping Green Bay put up 35 points and defeat New England, as Coates' season ended with him catching 62 balls for 682 yards and 9 touchdowns. The Pats were hoping to run it back in '97 and made sure that Coates was back with a 3-year extension. And while the on-field personnel looked the same for the most part, the man on the sideline was different, as disagreements between Parcells and team owner Robert Kraft had led to Parcells leaving the team and being replaced with former Niners defensive coordinator Pete Carroll. And under Carroll, a young and talented Pats defense would play very well. Then while they weren't the same offensive force as last year, they were still dangerous, and Coates was relieved for the talent that the Patriots had brought in over recent years, as it was taking the pressure and the beating off of him. However, they weren't as dangerous as they were last year, due to Terry Glenn missing half the season with injuries. But one guy you never had to worry about was old reliable Ben Coates, leading the team in both receptions and touchdowns, while recording the 3rd most receiving yards of his career in another Pro Bowl season. And while he wouldn't have any standout games this year, he was New England's most consistent producer through the air. He was at his best early in the season, as the Pats began the year with 4 straight wins. Then while his production slowed down later in the year, he still managed multiple receptions in all 16 games. And with Bledsoe throwing a career-high 28 touchdowns, and Curtis Martin clearly being one of the best backs in the league, along with a top 10 defense, the Pats racked up 10 wins and made a return to the playoffs with a wildcard matchup against Miami. Coates would have a quiet game, with the Pats offense only scoring once, and overall it was New England's defense who won this one, holding Miami to 3 points and advancing to a divisional round matchup with Pittsburgh. This would be a defensive battle, and Coates, who was playing with a sprained thumb, would be held catchless before leaving the game in the second half with a knee injury. And unfortunately for a New England team who was also without Curtis Martin, a first-quarter Steelers touchdown proved to be the difference maker in a 7-6 loss. With another great year from Coates, seeing him catch 66 balls for 737 yards and 8 touchdowns, New England was dealt a huge blow in the offseason, losing Curtis Martin to the New York Jets. But they looked to be in decent shape, with rookie running back Robert Edwards rushing for over 1,100 yards this year. But with Glenn having another down season, The Pats' offense had taken a step back, and Coates was beginning to show the effects of the beatings he had been taking across the middle for years, as he underwent off-season knee surgery, then was forced out of the season opener with an ankle injury, eventually leading to him being inactive for the Pats' Week 2 win over Indy, marking the first missed game of Coates' career. So Coates was hurting on the field, and then off the field, he was in and out of the courtroom, dealing with an assault charge from an ex-girlfriend, which he was eventually acquitted of in mid-December. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, as he had also lost pretty much all of the important women in his life over a 5-month span. So it had been anything but an easy year for the veteran tight end. But getting back to the gridiron, after returning from his 1-game absence, Coates eventually went on to haul in 2 touchdowns versus Kansas City in Week 6 to get New England their 4th straight win. Then after 2 losses, Coates had the final 100-yard game of his career when he went for 109 yards and a touchdown in a win over Indy. And while he would miss 1 more game this season, he once again led the Patriots in receptions and receiving touchdowns, en route to a 2nd-team All-Pro selection and the final Pro Bowl selection of his career. And while it was an up-and-down season for New England, they were able to win 9 games and get a wildcard matchup with Jacksonville. Except for the Pats went into this game with Steve Zolak as their starting quarterback, after Bledsoe had been lost for the season late in the year with a finger injury, as the Pats would throw for less than 200 yards in the wildcard, and Coates would account for just 10 of those in another playoff loss, with Coates' season seeing him haul in 67 balls for 668 yards and 6 touchdowns. A now 30-year-old Coates was breaking down, suffering a knee injury in training camp, and overall would be used less than ever in the passing game in '99. He was still out there every Sunday as the team's starting tight end, but with Terry Glenn playing most of the season and a rapidly improving Troy Brown, the Pats had a lot of receiving depth, and with Bledsoe having another down year, the overall passing attack suffered, so Coates put up his lowest numbers since before Bledsoe had gotten there, and was only able to find the end zone twice, with both of those scores coming in a Week 5 win over Indianapolis, eventually prompting Coates to express his frustration with the game plan, feeling that he was being phased out, and even expressing his desire to leave the only team he knew. And while New England would win 6 of their first 8 games, they would win just 2 of their final 8 games, and finishing the season at 500 would lead to them missing the playoffs for the first time in 4 years, as Coates would end his season with 32 receptions for 370 yards and 2 touchdowns. So with the way last season played out, Coates and the organization were on rocky terrain. Then during the offseason, the Pats would hire Bill Belichick as their new coach and give him full control over the roster. And just weeks later, Coates was given his walking papers, ending a 9-year partnership with the organization. So a free agent Coates would sign on with the Ravens, giving Baltimore the 2 best tight ends of the 90s, with Coates and his good friend Shannon Sharpe. But Coates was no longer the receiver he once was, and would need to adjust to a backup role, and instead was used more as a blocker, making holes for rookie running back Jamal Lewis. But the Ravens and their dominant defense would win 12 games before cruising through the playoffs and ultimately defeating the New York Giants for the franchise's first Super Bowl, and the first of Ben Coates' career, as Coates ended his season in Baltimore with 9 receptions for 84 yards. Coates was not re-signed after the season, and with his body breaking down and a Super Bowl ring, Ben Coates decided that it was time to walk away, leaving the game after an incredible 10-year career, which saw him get named to the NFL's 1990s All-Decade team, and leave the game sitting 4th all-time on the tight ends receptions list. And after his playing career ended, Coates tried his hand in coaching, both at his alma mater and in the NFL, and in 2008, Coates was inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame. Ben Coates was consistent and reliable. He didn't have blazing speed, but he had good hands and could hold on to anything. His game-by-game numbers would rarely blow your mind, but he'd always give you something. And that doesn't mean that he couldn't go off on any given Sunday either. One of the best receiving tight ends in the NFL during a period where tight ends weren't used in the passing game like they are today. Ben Coates was a touchdown machine and took a beating throughout his career, but he took every hit and dished out quite a few of his own as one of the greatest Patriots ever. And yes, the Patriots dynasty didn't truly begin until Tom Brady got there, but it tends to get overlooked that they were a legit contender during the 90s. And a big reason for that was due to having one of the best tight ends of all time. But that's it for today's episode on Ben Coates. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out these videos on a couple more underrated NFL stars of the 90s. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.